What if you tried to explain modern science to people from 3,000 years ago? Not as a conspiracy theory, not ancient aliens, not the ancients secretly knew quantum physics, just a simple thought experiment. Imagine you are sent into the ancient world with everything we know today. You know about bacteria, viruses, DNA, evolution, gravity, radiation, psychology, black holes, and the Big Bang. But the people around you have no microscopes, no telescopes, no laboratories, no chemistry, no biology, no modern math. They don't even have the words you need. So how do you tell them the truth? You can't say, disease is caused by microorganisms. They would ask, what is a microorganism? You can't show them bacteria. You can't explain cells. You can't explain the immune system. You can't say, trust the data, because there is no data, no charts, no studies, no scientific institutions. There is only what people can see, touch, fear, and remember. So you translate. You say, do not touch the sick. Wash yourself after contact. Stay away from the dead. Do not drink dirty water. Do not eat spoiled meat. Burn the contaminated cloth. Separate the clean from the unclean. To us, this sounds like hygiene, quarantine, and infection control. To them, it sounds like ritual. And maybe that is exactly the point. If you tell an ancient village, this behavior reduces the spread of disease, they may forget it. But if you say, this is sacred law, that rule might survive for 1,000 years. Now try explaining the universe. You know the universe began in an extremely hot, dense state. You know space expanded, particles formed, atoms formed, stars were born, planets formed, life appeared, and the atoms inside your body were forged inside ancient stars. But how do you explain that to people whose world is made of earth, sky, fire, water, animals, crops, and night? You cannot say, space-time expanded from an early, high-density state. So you reach for the closest images they understand. First, there was darkness. Then came light. Then the heavens separated from the earth. Then the waters separated from the land. Then lights appeared in the sky. Then life began. And suddenly, a simplified explanation of the universe starts to sound like a creation myth. Not because someone lied, because there was no better language available. The same thing happens with heredity. You know about genes, DNA, mutations, and inheritance. You know that parents pass traits to children. You know that disease, environment, trauma, and behavior can affect families across generations in complicated ways. But you cannot say genetic expression to someone living in the Bronze Age. So you say, the bloodline carries the memory of the ancestors. The actions of the fathers leave a mark on the children. A person is shaped by those who came before them. To us, that sounds poetic. To them, it may sound sacred. And after centuries of retelling, the original explanation would not survive as a scientific model. It would survive as an image, a warning, a commandment, a story. That is the strange power of myth. Myth is not always the enemy of knowledge. Sometimes myth is what knowledge turns into when it has to travel through a world that does not have the tools to understand it. An atom becomes a grain of sand. Electricity becomes lightning. Infection becomes impurity. Psychology becomes an inner spirit. Natural law becomes the will of a higher order. But here is the important part. This does not mean ancient sacred texts are secretly science textbooks. It does not mean every old story hides a lesson about physics or biology. And it definitely does not mean ancient people had modern scientific knowledge and somehow lost it. The point is not that the past knew what we know. The point is that if we tried to send our knowledge into the past, it would almost certainly come back looking like myth. Because knowledge needs a container. And if the container is too small, the knowledge changes shape. Think about it. In an ancient society, information was not entertainment. It was survival. Eat the wrong food and you die. Drink from the wrong water and the village gets sick. Touch the wrong body and disease spreads. Break the rules of the group and the community falls apart. Useful knowledge had to be stronger than advice. It had to become taboo. It had to become ritual. It had to become law. It had to become sacred. That is how fragile information survives in a world without books, laboratories, schools, or scientific language. You don't preserve it as a research paper. You preserve it as a story people are afraid to forget. And if we were sent into that world, we would probably do the same thing. We would speak in parables. We would explain invisible things through visible things. We would turn biology into purity, physics into divine order, psychology into spirits, astronomy into stories of heaven, evolution into a long chain of creation. Not because ancient people were stupid, but because every mind understands the world through the tools it has. You cannot explain viruses to people who cannot see them. You cannot explain billions of years to people who measure time in harvests and kings. You cannot explain quantum physics to people who do not even have algebra. So truth becomes metaphor, and metaphor, repeated long enough, becomes myth. That may be one reason sacred texts feel so powerful. Not because they explain the universe the way modern science does, but because they show what the human mind does when it stands in front of something too large to understand. It tells a story. Today we have instruments, formulas, satellites, laboratories, and universities. But remove all of that, and what happens to science? It becomes images, warnings, symbols, parables, rules for how to live. And if we tried to tell the ancient world everything we know today, maybe 1,000 years later, no one would be reading our explanation as science. They would be reading it as scripture.